Hey everyone, it's Lee Halliday, and in this video we're going to spend about 15 minutes looking at a cool little package called Immer, made by Michel Weststrate, the same creator of MobX and MobX State Tree. And it's just a little package to help you work with immutable data more easily. So in React, whenever you're modifying state or in Redux, you don't want to mutate the existing object. You want to basically create a copy and modify the copy of it instead. So you're always working with new copies of your data and never mutating the old one. So let's take a look at this package and see how it works. All right, so let me close everything here. And let's look at this little file, example.js. So here we have three functions. Change name, where we receive a person. So this is an object that might have like a name property on it. And we also receive a name. So as you can see here, I modify the existing data, set the new name, and then I return the person. So this is, I guess, what you'd call doing it poorly, just mutating the existing object. So we're not creating a copy, we're changing the old one. So I have a test over here that basically will test, and right now it's failing because I'm mutating it, but it tests that I'm doing it in an immutable way. So here I have a test. I'm importing the package at the top, change name. I've got my person. So it's just a little object with name set to Lee. I'm calling change name, passing in this object with the new name. And what I'm doing, I'm putting the result in a variable, and I'm expecting that the before is still Lee and the new is Albert. So right now, if I were to start up the tests, so yarn run test with a watch on it, it's going to fail because it is not immutable. So as you can see here, it was expecting to be Lee, but it wasn't, it was Albert. And that's because we're really just here, even though it's in two different variables, it's a reference to the exact same object. So how can we do it in a way that makes things immutable? Well, we can use ES6 to simply take a copy. Actually, why don't we do it this way? I'll always keep the old one so we can reference that. So what we can do is take a copy of the object by using ... person, and then we can add on the new name field to the end of that. So by doing it this way, we're working with a copy of the object rather than the original, and then we've modified the name. And you don't need name because it's the same as the variable. The property is the same as the variable. So we come back, and we got that test passing now. So this solves the problem. And whenever you're dealing with simple data, probably Immer's overkill. You can just create a copy and modify the property. But let's see how you would do it in Immer. So we're going to import. Typically it's called produce from Immer. We'll create a new version of this function, and we'll do it with Immer. So the way Immer works, it gives you this produce function. So we're going to call produce. And what you do is you pass in your current state as the first attribute when you're calling produce. So that would be person. And then your second parameter to this function is a function that receives like a working draft of the new version of how you want the data to look like. So this function, its goal is to basically modify the person to create the next state or the next version of it. And what Immer and the produce function allows you to do is basically to just modify your draft as if you were mutating the object. So you can just say name equals name, and it internally it keeps track of everything, and it modifies the object immutably for you, but you can do it in a mutation way. So if we come back here, our test is still passing, but we did it in a way that looks like this. So as you can see, it's probably overkill because it added probably more complexity, but more lines of code as well. And you'll see where it does get better when you're dealing with more complicated nested data. So let's look at the second example. Add person. So we've got an array of people, array of persons called people, and we want to add a new person to this. So by using push, we are mutating the array by pushing on a new element to it. So let's see how we can do it. Create a copy, and how we can do it in a way that does it immutably. So we can do the same sort of logic where we take a copy of the people array, and then we tack on a new one to the end of it. So same sort of thing. We have a test here where we have an array of 2 people, and we add on a new one. So here the test, it's expecting the length of the before to still be 2, whereas the length of the after should be 3 now. So now we only have one failing test, so we've fixed this one. Let's see how we can do it with Immer. So we will create a copy of that and come down here. So with Immer, we will call the produce function again, giving it our current or our old state, and we have our draft or our new state to work with. So here we can treat it like we were mutating it, where we can just push the new person on. And Immer internally will do that immutably by adding a new person to the array. And our test should still be passing. Cool. So let's go down to the last one. So here we have a change street function. And what this function receives, I'll just go back to my test. Here we're working with a little bit more complicated data. We have a person that has a name property, but this time we have an address property, which is another object that has a street. So here we're working with sort of multiple levels of objects. And it's failing because I've got the same sort of test that I'm checking the before, comparing it to the after to make sure that I did actually create a copy and I didn't change the original. So if we look here, we receive this with the new street. Here I'm just mutating it, and it fails because I've just changed the original. So let's see how we can do it just using ES6. So we are going to return, and we want to create a new copy of the person, but we need to modify the address property. So we come down here. But we don't just want to override it, we want to create a copy of the current address. So that's person.address. And then we'll modify the street to be the new one. So now you can see it's when you're working with nested data, it's starting to get a little bit ugly. I'm having to remember to do the triple dots twice. And you can imagine if it was 3 levels deep, it would start to look a little bit crazy. So that fixed the test. It made it immutable. But here's where Immer does a great job. I'm just going to copy this one, comment out that one. Okay. So here we change the street. We are going to return the produce function, which receives our object, and then a function that receives the new version of it. So here we can simply do it the immutable way, where we're accessing the address, then the street, and we're setting it to street. And the test should still be passing, and it is. So here's where Immer makes your life a lot easier. Whenever you're dealing with nested data, you can simply do it this way and mutate the object, and you get an immutable copy of it. Okay. So that's Immer just sort of on its own in regular JavaScript land, producing immutable data. And it gets even better when you're using Immer within a React app, especially around like the set state. So let's go take a look at this app. And before I even look at the code, I'll just show you quickly what it's doing. So I have it running over here. So it's obviously ugly, but here we have a birthday party that we're planning. Could be anything, hockey game. And we've got people who they have a name and they have a status of whether they're going or not. So we can modify their status, or we can remove them, and then we can add new ones and modify their status. So let's look at the data that sort of makes this up. Here we've got a component called app, and we've got our state. So in the state, we have the details of the event, and right now we just have the event name, which I hard-coded at the beginning to birthday party. And then we also have the people, which is an array of objects where each person has a UUID that's just being generated from this little utility function. They have a name, and then they have an attending status. So that's where it's true or false, which makes them going or not going. Okay. So down in the render, just come down here, we've got the input, which controls this up here, hockey game. And what I've got is an on-change event where I'm receiving the event, and I'm just I'm accessing its target, so that would be the input, and that input's value. So I've got value here, and I'm calling a function called setEventName. So that's the first time we're sort of changing state in the app. And because it's on the onChange event, anytime I'm typing, it's constantly, every character, it's setting the new state. So let's take a look at how we can improve this setEventName function with Immer. So the first thing I'm going to do is just import it. Import produce from Immer. And we'll come down here. So set event name. So what it's taking in is the new event name I should have. And the first thing we're doing is we're just extracting the details from the entire state. And then what I'm doing is that I'm setting the state where I'm saying the new details is going to be a copy of the old one with the modified event name. So let's just comment that out. And let's see how we do it with Immer. So we're going to actually start by calling setState, because setState can, yes, it can receive the new state that it wants to set, but you can also pass it a function. And when you pass it a function, it sort of gives you the next state, the one you're supposed to produce. So here you can modify it and then return that next state. But instead of doing that, we're actually going to pass produce. Because produce, when you only pass it a function, so here we have our draft. Normally we were passing, instead of a function as the first parameter, we were passing our current state. When you pass a function as its first parameter, it actually returns a function that will be sent to setState. And that way we sort of don't have to copy the state and then pass it to produce and then call setState. We can do this all in one call, where we're just passing the produce function to setState. And then to the produce function, we are sending a function that receives our draft state, and we're letting Immer control all of its modification. And then that will automatically be returned and your state will be updated. So what we can do here is, because this is nested data, we can say draft, and then we'll access, draft is the entire state. We'll access the details, the event name, and then we can just set it to be the new event name. So save that, and it auto formats, and now I think it's a lot better. We don't have to sort of keep track of, are we doing the dots correctly? We can just pass produce and a function, modify our state, and everything's done for us. So if I come back here, make changing, it's still working for us. It's still modifying the state. If I come down here and look at my React tools, so app has the details, so you can see that it's being modified here as I type. So the next thing we can do is we can handle the going and not going status with Immer instead. So Here you can see it's a little bit complicated. I'll go through what this code is doing. When this function is called, it is passed the UUID of the person being clicked on. So down here, as I'm looping through all of the people, so I've got people.map, and I'm mapping each person. I'm using the UUID of that person as the key, and I've got a button here that controls going, not going. So whenever you click it, we're passing in the UUID of the person and then the opposite of what they currently are. So if they're currently attending, the opposite of that would be false. So that's what we want to update the state to. So if I come up here, it's doing a lot. First of all, it's grabbing the people from the state. And then what I'm doing is I want to create a new copy of that people array. So the way I'm doing that is I'm mapping the old one, which will produce me a new array. And then for each person, I'm checking, is this person, as I'm looping over them, do they have the same UUID as the one that the person just clicked on? If they do, I will return a new version of that person, which is the old one, modified with the new attending status. Otherwise, there's no reason to change anything about this person, so let's just return them as is. And that way we've got this new people array, and we can update our people state. So let's see how we could maybe do that using Immer. Okay, so what we'll do instead is we'll just call setState right away, and we'll pass in the produce function, which receives the draft, and it's our job to modify the state to make the new one. So here what we can do is we can simply access the people and loop over them. So we've got person, and what we can do is the same little if statement. So if person.uuid is equal to the UUID that was just clicked on, we can simply just modify their attending status. Like that. So this code here replaces all of the above code. And let's just make sure that it's working. So we'll comment out that. So we're only using the Immer code now. So we come back here and we've got going and not going. So it's modifying correctly using Immer, doing things immutably. So normally you wouldn't use for each to modify data. That's a no-no when you're dealing with immutable data. But because the Immer's handling sort of all aspects of our data inside of this producing function, as we're mutating the data, it's actually handling all the mutability for us. So last thing I wanted to cover is just how we add a new person. So that happens when you add a new person here. We'll say Grandpa's coming now. So we'll come back and this function add person is called. Right now it's getting a copy of it's extracting the people from the state, and then we're saying, okay, people is now going to be the old one plus a new person. So you can sort of see where this is going. We're going to call setState right away. Oops. Passing the produce function, which receives a function that has the draft. And here we can just say draft.people, and we can push a new person right on. And Immer will handle all the immutability aspects of it for us. Like that. So make sure Grandpa can still come. We'll remove him. Add Grandpa again, change his status. Okay, so it's all working. So just to cover what we did, we basically looked at how you can handle immutability, but doing it in a way that very much looks like the old way you do it, mutably changing an existing object. And by using Immer and specifically the produce function, it handles all of the immutability changes for us. So we looked at here we're just simply changing name, we're just modifying an attribute. Here we're working with an array, and we can push new elements onto the array. And here we looked at how it can handle nested or more complicated data structures as well. So it will work with sort of any combination of arrays and objects together. And then we did the same in our app here, where we looked at, okay, how would you have to do it immutably just using ES6 code? How can you use the produce function in a slightly different way, where we're passing a function as the first attribute? And in that way, it returns a function which is sent to setState, because setState can receive a function as well. So hope you enjoyed the video. Definitely try out using Immer yourselves. I add it to pretty much all projects now just because I find it way easier to ensure immutability by using this rather than trying to make sure that I'm creating all the correct copies using the ES6 way. All right, take care. Bye.